At dinner, my brother scoffed, "Still single must be pathetic." So I smiled and reminded him I'd paid his rent for 3 years, then told him the free ride ended tonight in front of the whole family. I used to think my family wasn't that different from anyone else's. A little loud, occasionally petty, sometimes too nosy for their own good. But what family isn't right? At least that's what I told myself. You learn to brush things off, laugh it off when your mom makes a backhanded comment about your clothes, shrug when your dad pretends not to hear you over your brother's latest accomplishment. You tell yourself they don't mean anything by it, that they love you in their own way. But there's always a moment, a very specific cutting moment, when the illusion finally shatters. Mine happened over roast chicken and red wine at a dinner table I didn't even want to sit at in the first place. My name's Derek. I'm 31, and I work in software development. Nothing glamorous, but I'm good at it. I live alone. I make a comfortable income, and I've been lucky enough to carve out a peaceful little life for myself in the city. I like quiet mornings, long bike rides, and tinkering with old video game mods on weekends. I'm single, yes, not by some tragic accident. Not because I'm undateable, as my family sometimes jokes, but because after a particularly messy breakup in my mid-20s, I decided I'd rather be alone than with someone who made me feel small. Apparently, that mindset never sat right with my parents. See, in my family, my younger brother Connor is the golden child. He's 28, charming in a greasy car salesman kind of way. Always talking loud enough for everyone to hear how busy, important, or stressed he is, even when he's between jobs, which, to be fair, is often. Somehow, he's always about to land something big. But in the meantime, he's been floating on a mattress of soft expectations and my parents' bottomless well of excuses. The kind of guy who thinks ambition is a personality trait, but can't wake up before 11 a.m. without a Red Bull and a guilt trip. Mom dotes on him. He's just figuring things out, she says, even though he's crashed 3 cars and ghosted 2 landlords. Dad likes to pretend he's tough on him, grumbling about Connor's irresponsibility while pouring him another glass of bourbon and slipping him a $100 bill when he thinks no one's looking. I used to be angry about it, but I've grown numb over the years. Until recently, I was even helping Connor out myself quietly behind the scenes. 3 years ago, after he got evicted from yet another apartment, I started covering part of his rent under the agreement that he'd pay me back when he got back on his feet. I didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not my friends, just kept sending the money each month like a fool. Anyway, this particular dinner wasn't supposed to be dramatic. It was my mom's idea. A family night at their house now that Connor was finally doing better. The invite came with guilt baked right into it. "We never see you anymore." Mom had texted even though I'd come by just a few weeks earlier. "It'd mean a lot to your father." I almost declined. I had a stressful project going live that week, and honestly, I just didn't have the energy for the usual passive-aggressive comments and performative small talk. But guilt is a powerful thing, and so I showed up dressed nice, brought a bottle of wine, even offered to help with dishes. Dinner started out as expected. Polite conversation about work, the weather, a new neighbor who had the audacity to paint their shutters turquoise. I mostly kept quiet, nodding and smiling. Dad asked how my job was going, then cut me off halfway through my answer to ask Connor if he was still talking to that recruiter in Atlanta. Connor, of course, launched into a dramatic story about how he almost got flown out for a 6F figuror role. But they wanted someone with more niche experience or something. The usual smoke and mirrors. Mom beamed at him like he was auditioning for American Idol. I was chewing on a piece of chicken when it happened. Connor leaned back in his chair, sipped his wine, and looked at me with that smug grin he wears like cologne. "Still single, huh?" he said, real casual. "Must be lonely being a failure." He chuckled. He chuckled like it was a harmless joke between brothers, like it wasn't a deliberate shot across the table in front of our parents, who both gave soft, knowing laughs like he'd just said something cheeky and clever instead of cruel. I blinked, fork halfway to my mouth, heartbeat suddenly loud in my ears. For a second, I didn't say anything, just stared at him, wondering what kind of person could say something like that with a straight face, especially after everything I'd done for him, everything I'd sacrificed, the jobs I'd passed on, the vacations I didn't take. The countless times I said yes when I should have said, "Are you kidding me?" I felt the heat rising in my neck. My first instinct was to laugh it off, pretend it didn't sting, but something in me snapped instead. Quietly, cleanly, like a final thread breaking in a sweater you've been tugging at for too long. So I set my fork down, wiped my mouth with my napkin, looked my brother dead in the eye, and said, "Funny coming from a guy whose rent I've paid for 3 years. Not anymore, by the way. You could have heard a pin drop." "Yes, bye." Connor's face froze, the smirk evaporating like steam. Mom's mouth fell open in slow motion like a cartoon. Dad set his wine glass down a little too hard. The silence was deafening, and for the first time in a very, very long time, I felt something sharp and cold and strangely satisfying settle in my chest. Control. But that was just the beginning. Because what I said at that table, that wasn't revenge. That was a warning shot. A single crack in the dam. I didn't know it yet, but that dinner would become the turning point in everything. The way my family saw me, the way I saw myself, and the way all our dirty little secrets came tumbling out like junk from an overstead attic. You think you know your family until money's involved, until pride's on the line, until someone decides they're done being the doormat. And I was done. So done. But what came next? Even I didn't see it coming. Let me tell you how it all unfolded. Mom was the first to break the silence, though she didn't so much speak as gasp. It was theatrical, as if I'd confessed to robbing a bank or kicking a puppy. "Derek," she hissed, clutching her pearls. Okay, not literally, but she might as well have. "Why would you say something like that?" I just looked at her calmly, quietly. I didn't raise my voice, didn't gloat. I wasn't interested in causing a scene for the sake of it. I was tired, not angry, not bitter, just done. Connor, meanwhile, was still frozen. The smugness had drained from his face, entirely replaced with something between confusion and indignation. He looked like a magician whose trick had failed mid-P performance, caught off guard that I'd pulled back the curtain in front of the audience. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered finally, laughing nervously and glancing at our parents for support. "Derek's exaggerating." "Am I?" I said, folding my napkin and setting it beside my plate. "Because I've got the bank records if you need a refresher. Every month on time like clockwork." My dad cleared his throat sharply. The universal dad signal for enough. He hated confrontations. Always had. If it couldn't be solved with a raised eyebrow or a passive-aggressive silence, he wanted no part of it. "We don't need to rehash all that at the dinner table," he said, not looking at me. "Of course not, because when Connor makes a dig, it's just boys being boys." But when I clapped back with facts, suddenly it's inappropriate. I leaned back and smiled politely. "Right. Sorry, I forgot we don't talk about actual problems here." Mom stood up, then flustered, grabbing my plate even though I hadn't finished. "Why don't I get dessert?" she said too brightly, her voice wobbling. "I made that lemon tart you like. I'm not really hungry anymore," I replied. And the second the words left my mouth, I saw the flicker of hurt in her eyes. And here's the thing. I didn't want to hurt her. That's the part that stung the most. She was my mother. But somewhere along the way, she'd stopped being a mom and started being a PR manager for my brother's failures. Every gathering, every conversation, every compliment filtered through Connor first. His victories were paraded. My stability was ignored. I'd spent years being the quiet, reliable one, the background character in my own family, and I was just supposed to keep smiling through it. That night, I left early. Didn't say goodbye, didn't hug anyone. I got in my car and just sat there for a while, watching the lights in the living room flicker through the blinds. I thought about all the birthdays I'd spent organizing gifts for both of us while Connor forgot mine entirely. About the time he totaled his car and I lent him mine for 6 months without asking for gas money. About the week our dad had surgery and I took time off work to help around the house while Connor showed up 2 days late with a hangover and a half-eaten burger. It wasn't just the rant. It was everything. 1,000 tiny moments that had piled up over the years until I couldn't tell where the resentment ended and my spine began. The next morning, I got a text from Mom. "We need to talk. That was really uncalled for last night. Not how are you feeling, or I didn't realize things had gotten that far." No, it was my behavior that was the problem. I didn't reply. Over the next few days, the silence grew heavy. I didn't get my usual Sunday check-in call. No guilt. Trippy recipe photos. No. Saw this and thought of you messages. I should have felt guilty, but instead I felt something close to relief. For once, the emotional labor wasn't mine to do. I went to work. I hit the gym. I cleaned my apartment and listened to old jazz records and watched a documentary on mountain climbers who risked their lives just to stand alone at the top of the world. And for the first time in a long time, I actually understood the appeal. Then on Thursday, Connor called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hey," he said, his voice all strained and performative like he was already preparing for the Emmy-winning monologue. "Can we talk?" "I think we're doing that now," I replied, pouring myself a cup of coffee and keeping my tone neutral. There was a pause. I didn't know you felt that way," he said finally. "If you were struggling with something, you could have just told me." That made me laugh. I couldn't help it. "You're serious," I said, sitting down. "I was struggling, Connor. I was covering your rent because you begged me to. You promised you'd pay me back. You told me not to tell Mom and Dad because you were handling it like a man. And then you mocked me at dinner in front of him. That's not struggling. That's using me." "I didn't mean it like that," he muttered. "No, you meant it exactly like that. You wanted the applause without doing the work, and you've always gotten it. That's not my fault, but I'm done pretending I don't see it. He was quiet for a second then. So what? You're cutting me off. Yep, I said. Rinse on you now. Grow up. He hung up. I expected backlash. I expected anger. But what I didn't expect was the campaign that followed. First came the calls from Mom. Connor's been having a really hard time lately, Derek. He's not as strong as you are. He just needs a little more time. Then came the group texts, suddenly revived after months of silence. Connor got a flat tire on his way to a job interview. Can anyone help? Connor's apartment might have mold. Do you know any lawyers? Connor's feeling really low today. Just letting you boys know. Every message like that was a pebble tossed into my shoes. Small, annoying, but impossible to ignore. It wasn't helpful communication. It was pressure dressed up as family concern, emotional blackmail with a smiley face. At one point, Mom called me while I was at work and actually said, "You're being really selfish right now." Selfish? The word made my skin crawl. I'd given so much time, money, peace of mind. And now that I wasn't giving more, I was the problem. I'm not selfish, I said calmly. I'm just not a doormat. Click. A few days later, I got a notification from Venmo. Connor had requested $800, just the word please in the memo line. I didn't respond. An hour later, he texted me, "Really, after everything I've done for you." That one sent me into a full-blown spiral. I paced around my apartment for 10 straight minutes trying to wrap my head around the sheer gall of it. Everything he's done for me, like what? Borrow my headphones and never return them. Crash on my couch for a week, that turned into 3 months. Introduced me to a girl he later tried to hit on behind my back. My therapist once told me that narcissists rewrite history to suit their version of events, and if you're not careful, they'll make you doubt your own memories. I used to think she was being dramatic. Now I wasn't so sure. The final straw came a week later. I'd taken a Saturday off to relax. No work, no calls, just a lazy morning with coffee and an old video game I hadn't played in years. Around noon, there was a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, there stood Mom, purse slung over her shoulder, wearing a look of wounded disappointment so practiced it could have been bottled and sold. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, stepping past me without waiting for permission. I blinked. Hi." She walked straight into my living room and sat down like she owned the place. "I came to talk," she said, face to face. I stood there baffled about what. She looked at me, her eyes already brimming. "Connor's been struggling again. He might lose his apartment. He told me you cut him off, and now he's behind on bills. He's embarrassed. He didn't want me to come, but I had to." I stayed silent. Let her finish. "He made a mistake, Derek. But we help family. That's what we do. You've always been the responsible one, the strong one, please, just until he's back on his feet." I sat down across from her, letting the weight of her words settle like dust. "You want me to keep paying for his lifestyle because he's too proud to admit he's never grown up," I said slowly. "You want me to undo the only boundary I've ever set because it makes you uncomfortable." Her lips tightened. "That's not fair." "No, it's not," I said. "None of this has ever been fair. But I'm not playing along anymore." She stared at me for a long moment. Then she stood up. "I hope you can live with yourself," she said coldly, and she walked out. No hug, no goodbye. Just the heavy click of the door closing behind her. I sat there for a long time after she left. No music, no distractions, just silence and the creeping realization that something fundamental had shifted. Not just in my family dynamic, but in me. For the first time in my life, I'd said no and meant it. No caveats, no apologies. And that was when I realized they weren't just upset because I stopped helping. They were upset because they never thought I'd stop. But they were in for a surprise because I was only just getting started. A week passed, no calls, no texts, no unexpected door knocks. For the first time in months, maybe years, there was silence. And silence, as it turns out, can be both comforting and terrifying. I thought I'd feel free, liberated, even after finally standing up for myself. But instead, I found myself watching my phone like it was a ticking bomb waiting for the next guilt trip or veiled accusation. But nothing came. At first, I assumed they were giving me space. Maybe they were actually reflecting. Maybe Mom was starting to see the imbalance. Maybe Connor was having a long overdue mirror moment. I even began to feel a bit of hope. Foolish in hindsight. Because what I didn't realize was that the silence wasn't space. It was strategy. They weren't retreating. They were regrouping. It started with a phone call from Aunt Rachel, my mom's sister, the unofficial family gossip line, and someone I rarely spoke to outside of the holidays. She was always nice enough, but her loyalty was with my mother through and through. So when her name popped up on my phone on a Thursday evening, I hesitated. Answering it felt like walking into a conversation that had already been scripted. "Hi, sweetheart," she chirped, overly cheerful. "Got a minute?" I braced myself. "Sure, what's up?" "Oh, I was just talking to your mom the other day. She's so worried about you. Said you've been distant cold," I told her. "That doesn't sound like Derek. He's always been such a sweetheart." "Uh-huh," I said, already regretting picking up. "Well, things have been a little tense lately." "Oh," I heard she said in that sugary tone people use right before a character assassination. "About the money, you poor thing. You've always been so generous. It must be hard feeling like no one appreciates you." That caught me off guard. "Thanks," I said slowly. "But honey," she added gently, "you know your brother's had a hard life. All those ups and downs. It's just who he is. You can't change him. And your mother? Well, she's always tried her best, hasn't she? Maybe she doesn't always say the right thing, but she's only human." And there it was. The subtle shift, the backpedal from you, were right to be the bigger person. "I'm not trying to change anyone," I said. "I'm just done sacrificing my peace for people who don't respect me." She sighed. Of course, of course. I just hope you don't let one little family spat turn into something bigger. You know how time slips by. People grow old, regrets pile up." I didn't say anything because I could feel it. This wasn't just Aunt Rachel reaching out. This was a message hand-delivered and guilt-wrapped from Mom herself. They'd enlisted the cavalry. The family charm offensive had begun. Over the next few days, it snowballed. My cousin texted me out of the blue asking if I was okay. An old family friend I hadn't spoken to since college left a comment on one of my Facebook posts. "Families fight, but love wins in the end." I even got an actual email from my uncle. The subject line, just some thoughts. Inside was a long-winded essay about forgiveness, spiritual growth, and how holding grudges makes you bitter, not better. It was surreal, like they'd formed a campaign committee behind my back. But I kept quiet. I didn't argue. I didn't post cryptic quotes or write long rants. I just watched it all unfold, growing more disillusioned by the day until the betrayal came. It was a Friday afternoon. I had just wrapped up a long Zoom call and was looking forward to a quiet evening when I got a call from my landlord. That alone was odd. He rarely called, preferring emails for anything transactional. I answered, and his tone was tense from the start. "Derek," he said, "I just wanted to give you a heads up. Your brother dropped by today." My stomach tightened. "Connor, yeah. Said you'd given him permission to come by and pick up some stuff. Said he'd lost his key and needed access. He seemed convincing. Had your last name, your address, everything." What I said sharply, already standing up. "What did he take?" "Well," the landlord said hesitantly. "Nothing, luckily. My maintenance guy happened to be here and call me just in case. I told him to hold off. Figured I should check with you first." I stood there in stunned silence, trying to process what I just heard. Connor had tried to break into my apartment using my name, using our relationship, and not even to confront me, just to sneak in. My voice was cold when I finally responded. "Thank you for calling me." He absolutely did not have permission. "If he comes by again, don't let him in. And please call the police if he pushes it." The landlord sighed. "I figured it might be something like that. Family drama, something like that," I muttered. I hung up and stared at the wall for a solid minute. My heartbeat was loud in my ears, not from fear, but from fury. That was the line. That was the line. It wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't about snide remarks or favoritism or even emotional manipulation. This was violating trust. And I knew exactly where he'd gotten the idea. Mom, maybe not directly, but I could feel her fingerprints on it. The desperation, the entitlement. The assumption that I wouldn't do anything about it, that I'd fold like I always had. They thought I'd bark. They didn't think I'd bite. I called Connor immediately. He didn't pick up. I called again. Voicemail. On the third try, he finally answered, his voice groggy and defensive, like I'd just woken him from a nap. He didn't earn. "Yo, you tried to get into my apartment." Pause. Then a scoff. "What, no?" "My landlord called me. Said you claimed I gave you permission." Another pause. "I just needed to grab something." He said finally, like that somehow justified it. "I left a few things there last year. You said I could come back for them anytime. Last year." "Not today, and not without telling me. You tried to lie your way into my home, Connor." "Oh, come on, man, don't be dramatic." I felt my hands clenching into fists. "You trespassed. If the maintenance guy hadn't been there, you might have gotten in." "What then? You start going through my things, steal from me, crash on my couch again. You're blowing this out of proportion, he snapped. You think you're so perfect now, huh? Just because you've got a little money and your own place? I earned all of it, I said, voice shaking. While you were wasting chances and burning bridges, I was working and I kept helping you. I kept helping you even when you didn't deserve it, and this is what you do. He didn't answer, so I hung up. Then I blocked him. Not just on my phone, on everything. Social media, email, even our shared family Spotify plan. Petty maybe, but symbolic. I was done pretending we were brothers in any meaningful way. Blood means nothing without trust. Then I texted, Mom, Connor tried to break into my apartment today. This is no longer about money. This is about safety. I've blocked him. Please respect my boundaries or I will go no contact with you too. No reply. Not for hours. And when it finally came, it said, you know your brother didn't mean any harm. Don't destroy this family over a misunderstanding. And that was it. No apology, no outrage, no motherly concern that her younger son had tried to deceive his way into her older son's home. Just a plea to not destroy the family, as if it hadn't been slowly corroding for years, as if I was the one holding a match not standing in the ashes. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake replaying every moment, every red flag I ignored. Every time I'd brushed off the favoritism as just how it is. They didn't care about me, they cared about keeping the machine running, and now that I'd stopped fueling it, they were ready to let me go. But I wasn't going to slink away quietly. No, I had a plan. And it was time to let them see what happened when the failure stopped playing nice. I won't lie to you. After that last message from Mom, something inside me cracked. Not in the loud, dramatic way you see in movies. There was no shouting, no throwing of plates, no sudden urge to scream into the void. It was quieter than that, more hollow. Like discovering your favorite childhood book was full of pages you'd never noticed before, and they all painted you as the villain. I sat on my couch that night with all the lights off, just the faint glow of the street lamp bleeding through the curtains and the hum of my fridge filling the silence. I don't know how long I sat there, but when I finally stood, my legs felt heavy. Not physically, emotionally. It's strange how grief works, because that's what it was, grief. Not for a person, but for the idea of something. The idea that your family is supposed to be your anchor. The people who show up, who care, who protect you. And when you realize they're not, when you finally admit they never really were, it feels like a death not of a person, but of a version of you who still hoped. I didn't go to work the next day. I called in sick and stayed in bed until noon, not even scrolling on my phone, just lying there. My mind was a swamp. No clear thoughts, no anger, no plans. Just a weight, the kind that makes even brushing your teeth feel like a monumental task. But eventually routine one. It always does. I got up, I ate something. Cold leftover pasta, barely palatable. I showered, though the water felt too hot and the bathroom mirror too cruel. And then I sat back down at my desk and opened a blank document. I didn't know what I was going to type. I just needed to do something. What came out wasn't a letter. It wasn't a rant. It was a list. A list of everything I'd done for Connor over the past 10 years. The apartment rent, obviously. $800 a month for 36 months. $28,800. The car repair I covered when he crashed into a mailbox. $2,400. That time I paid off his credit card because he was being harassed by collectors. $5,100. Countless dinners, gas fill-ups, Uber rides, and emergency bailouts. Conservatively, $3,000 more. Total $39,300. And that was just the financial part. There was no column for emotional labor. No line item for all the times I stood between him and Dad's rage when he missed another deadline. No valuation for the countless times I bit my tongue at family dinners while he made me the punchline. No invoice for the weekends I spent helping him move or rewrite his resume or edit his cover letters. I stared at the number on the screen. Nearly $40,000. That could have been a new car, a vacation, a down payment, a life. And I'd handed it over piece by piece like it was candy at Halloween. The worst part, he never once said thank you. Not once, not meaningfully. Maybe a casual thanks, bro. Here and there, usually followed by, I'll get you back, but never. Eye contact, never acknowledgement, never accountability. The rest of that week was a blur. I went back to work, but I kept my head down, declined. Happy hours, skipped gym sessions, turned off social media. My phone vibrated here and there, but I didn't check it. I couldn't. Every notification felt like a dagger waiting to be unshaved. But the world doesn't stop spinning just because you're in emotional quicksand. On Monday, my boss pulled me aside after our morning meeting. You okay? He asked gently. I nodded. Just a rough week. He didn't press. Take Friday off. Use it as a mental health day. I nearly teared up. Not because I needed the day, though I did, but because he noticed. My boss, a man with 50 other employees and a mountain of deadlines, had noticed something was off. And my own mother had responded to a potential break-in with, "Don't destroy this family." That contrast haunted me. So I took Friday off, but not to mope. I drove out of the city 2 hours north to a lake I used to visit as a teenager. It wasn't anything fancy, just a secluded spot near a worn-out dock, the kind of place that didn't show up on tourist maps. I packed a sandwich, a notebook, and a blanket. No music, no laptop, just me and the sound of wind through trees. I sat by the water for hours, watched ducks glide past through pebbles, let the breeze tug at my sleeves, and somewhere between sandwich bites and the third failed attempt at skipping a stone, I decided something. I was done reacting, done just enduring things, because that's what I've been doing my whole life. Enduring, smiling through it, minimizing my own discomfort to keep the peace, making myself smaller, so others didn't feel inadequate, shrinking in rooms I should have stood tall in. I was the nice one, the responsible one, the one who didn't need anything. But that wasn't strength, it was self-eraser. And now I was going to rewrite that. It started small. I canceled the shared Spotify family plan. The notification alone must have sent a ripple through the group chat, but I didn't care. I changed my Netflix password, removed every device. I updated my bank account security questions, called my landlord to put a note in my file. Do not let anyone access my unit unless confirmed by voice. I even reached out to a lawyer I'd met at a conference months ago just for advice. Not legal action yet, but to ask, what would it take to legally distance myself from family? What protections existed if a sibling became a threat? What lines had to be crossed? She was helpful, not alarmed. In fact, she sounded like she'd had this conversation before, and that alone comforted me. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. This wasn't some petty feud. This was survival. Around that time, something strange happened. Connor disappeared. Radio silence. No texts, no calls, no random Venmo requests or accidental tags on social media. For a moment, I thought maybe he'd finally gotten the message. Maybe he'd moved on, or maybe mom had reined him in, but I should have known better because Connor doesn't disappear unless he's planning something. And I was about to find out just how deep that rabbit hole went. The first sign came through LinkedIn of all places. A colleague messaged me with a screenshot. Hey man, weird question. Didn't your brother apply here last year? Thought you'd want to see this. The screenshot was of Connor's profile, except the bio had changed. It now listed him as a freelance software consultant with experience in AI development, product management, and back-end architecture, with 3 projects listed underneath my projects from my portfolio with altered dates and company names. He'd literally stolen my work, phrased it like his own, even quoted some of the language I'd used in a past conference talk. Word for word, I stared at the screen, pulse pounding. For a second, I thought maybe it was a glitch, some bizarre error. But no, it was intentional. Connor had turned himself into a watered-down version of me, a Frankenstein's monster stitched together with pieces of my accomplishments. And suddenly I knew why he'd gone quiet. He wasn't gone. He was becoming. At least trying to. I messaged him, not to scold, not to confront, just, you need to take my work off your profile. Now no reply. I gave it an hour. Then I emailed the companies he listed, most of which I'd consulted for, and sent them my original work with timestamps. One responded immediately. The VP wrote, "Thanks for flagging this." That name sounded familiar. "We'll handle it." I didn't know what handle it meant, but I trusted it would make a dent. The other shoe dropped 2 days later when I got a call from my mother. "What did you do?" she snapped. "No greeting. Excuse me, Connor said you got him blacklisted. He was just trying to build a new career. He admired your work. He thought you'd be proud." I almost laughed. Proud. He impersonated me. "Mom, he stole from me." "You always twist things," she hissed. "No wonder no one wants to be around you anymore." And with that, she hung up. No wonder. No wonder that one stuck with me. Not, "I'm disappointed." Not, "That was wrong." But no wonder. It was the first time I realized she'd made her choice. There was no middle ground anymore. No mother torn between sons. Just a woman protecting her favorite and a man realizing he was now free. Because once you've hit rock bottom with the people who raised you, there's a strange clarity that settles in. You stop hoping for the apology. You stop rewriting your past, and you start writing your future. Quietly, strategically. No fanfare, no warnings. You simply begin. And trust me, that's what I was doing. It's funny how rock bottom, once it settles beneath your feet, can become solid ground. I'd spent years running on a treadmill of guilt and obligation, always feeling like I was behind, like I was one favor away from finally being accepted. But now that the treadmill had stopped, now that I'd stepped off it for good, I realized how much energy I'd been wasting just to stand still. And once I stopped pouring into them, I had so much left for myself. It didn't happen overnight. There was no sudden montage of me in sunglasses getting promoted, dating a supermodel, and walking away from explosions in slow motion. Real life doesn't work that way. But the shift was real. and it was lasting. The first real change came quietly on a Wednesday morning. I'd been working on a side project for months, a machine learning tool for automating customer support analysis. Nerdy, I know, but it had real value. My idea was to help mid-sized companies parse through customer tickets and flag recurring issues using a mix of sentiment analysis and keyword clustering. A mouthful, but in practice it meant turning noise into strategy. I'd built the MVP alone nights weekends on breaks between Zoom calls, and now finally it was ready. I posted a short video demo on LinkedIn, not expecting much, just putting it out there. By noon, the video had over 3,000 views. By Friday, it had 27,000. A week later, I got a message from a startup accelerator asking if I was open to pitching the tool at an upcoming tech showcase. Me pitching. A year ago. I would have hesitated, told myself I wasn't ready. Maybe even asked Connor to help because he always liked being on stage. But now I knew better. I said yes. I spent 2 weeks preparing that pitch like my life depended on it. I trimmed the fat, polished the UI, practiced my timing. I even rented a decent jacket, something sharp, something clean, and cut my hair for the first time in months. It wasn't about looks, not really. It was about reclaiming something I'd let slip away. Self-respect. The day of the showcase, I walked into that room full of polished founders and sleepless developers with one thought in my head. You have nothing to prove to anyone but yourself. I nailed the pitch. 15 minutes, no stumbles, no filler. By the time I walked off stage, I already had 2 people handing me cards. A third messaged me that night with a question about integration. A week later, I had a small angel investor ready to write a check for $50,000 in exchange for early equity. I couldn't believe it. Well, I could. I'd built it. I knew the value. But for once, I let myself enjoy the moment. Not in a performative way, not because I wanted my parents to finally say, "We're proud of you," but because I was proud of me, and that was new. I used part of the money to upgrade my apartment. Not move, just enhance. A proper standing desk ergonomic chair replaced my ancient laptop with a beast of a machine that ran everything like butter. Got a noise-canceling headset that made Zoom calls feel like private conversations in a vault. Slowly, my home began to feel less like a holding cell and more like a headquarters. I started taking care of myself in other ways, too. I signed up for therapy again, this time with someone who specialized in adult children of emotionally manipulative families. I hit the gym not out of shame, but because it felt good to move again. I read books, cooked actual meals, took long walks at sunset without checking my phone, bit by bit. I was building a life where I didn't just survive, I existed. And the best part, no one in my family knew. I had gone dark quiet off the grid, and it was the most peaceful silence I'd ever experienced. I expected Mom or Connor to try again, another guilt message, another phony crisis. But nothing came. Maybe they finally realized I wasn't bluffing, or maybe more likely they just assumed I'd circle back eventually like I always had. After all, that's what I did, right? I was the stable one, the good son, the one who always came home. But I wasn't that person anymore, and eventually I knew I'd have to show them. I didn't plan for the opportunity to come when it did. It was about 6 months after I launched the product. Let's call it Query Pulse, and we just landed a pilot deal with a mid-tier SaaS company that wanted a full implementation. It wasn't earth-shattering money, but it was real money, enough to hire 2 contractors to help build out the dashboard and support requests. One of them was an old college friend named Rachel Sharp, no nonsense, and one of the best UX designers I'd ever worked with. The other was a quiet back-end dev I found through a Discord server. And within weeks, we were moving like a real team. Momentum built fast, users started coming in, so did feedback. Some critical, some glowing, but all of it useful. I set up a newsletter, a blog even started recording small video tutorials. Not flashy, not viral, but clear, useful, honest, the kind of thing I would have needed when I was starting out. That's when the podcast invites began. Small shows at first, indie tech hosts, startup junkies, but the audience was loyal, curious, engaged. One host, a guy named Leo, who ran a show called Bits and Pieces, asked me to do a deep dive episode on solo founder resilience. It was supposed to be a 30-minute chat. We ended up talking for 2 hours. It was the most open I'd ever been publicly about burnout manipulation and the emotional cost of carrying other people's failures. I didn't name names, didn't throw my family under the bus, but I told the truth that I used to think being strong meant never saying no. That guilt had kept me tethered to people who drained me. That walking away wasn't abandonment, it was survival. When the episode dropped, I expected some quiet feedback, maybe a few DMs. Instead, it exploded. I got emails, dozens, from people who said they saw themselves in my story. A founder whose brother kept stealing from his company. A woman who'd spent 20 years covering her father's debts. A guy whose mother guilt-tripped him into giving up a job offer so he wouldn't move too far away. It hit something real. I hadn't meant to become a voice for anyone. I just wanted to breathe. But now that I had others were breathing too. Around this time, I got a message on LinkedIn from someone with a familiar last name. A recruiter from the company Connor had tried to impersonate me at. He said simply, "We spoke with someone last year who misrepresented themselves. Thanks for flagging it. If you ever want to talk about opportunities, the door's open." I politely declined. I wasn't looking to be an employee anymore. But I did smile when I read it because that was justice, not revenge, not spite. Truth. And the truth, when you stand in it long enough, becomes armor. Still, I didn't reach out to my family. Even as I grew, even as Query Pulse gained traction, even as I began getting invites to speak at small tech conferences, share lessons, talk shop, I stayed quiet because I didn't need their applause. I didn't need them at all. But life, as always, has a sense of timing you can't predict. One Sunday morning, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. Subject: Your family wants to talk. Nobody, just that subject attached a scanned wedding invitation. Connor's wedding to a woman I'd never heard of in 3 weeks. No RSVP link, no personal message, no note from mom, just my name, the date, and a reminder that family is forever. And that's when I knew they needed something, because if they truly wanted to reconcile, they'd have picked up the phone, written a letter, showed remorse. But this was a baited hook, and I had no intention of biting. Still, I wasn't going to ignore it because sometimes the best way to reclaim your story is to show up on your own terms. And this wedding, it was going to be the perfect stage. Not for revenge, not for drama, but for truth. Because the man they expected to walk in through those doors, the quiet, agreeable brother who never made waves, he was gone. And in his place, someone who didn't need their approval to be whole. Let's talk about the wedding. But first, let me be clear. I had no intention of going. Not at first. When that email landed in my inbox with Connor's wedding invite coldly attached like a corporate memo, I almost laughed. After everything they'd done after the lies, the emotional warfare, the fake LinkedIn profile, the attempted break-in, they thought I'd show up to smile for pictures. But as I sat there staring at that RSVP PDF, a realization hit me. They weren't inviting me because they missed me. They were inviting me because they needed me. And that's when I knew this wasn't just a wedding. It was a setup, a display, a stage for Connor to finally win. The prodigal failure returns triumphantly, now mature, responsible, married. And me, I was meant to be a silent extra in the background, maybe even a tool for his redemption arc. Look, even Derek came, they'd say, as if the broken relationships and betrayal had all just been silly misunderstandings that time had healed. But time hadn't healed anything. It had sharpened everything. So I said yes. Not with a reply, not with a phone call. I clicked print, circled the date with a red marker, and tacked it to my court board like it was a deadline. Because I wasn't just going to that wedding. I was going prepared. And I wasn't going as Derek, the quiet, responsible older brother. I was going as me. The first thing I did was a little digging. If I was going to walk into enemy territory, I needed intel. So I went to where all family secrets eventually leak. Facebook, mom still had me blocked. So did Connor, but Aunt Rachel still wide open and a habitual oversharer. Her timeline was a goldmine. Photos, status updates, cryptic subtweets about some people forgetting where they came from. It was all there. But the real nugget came from a comment thread beneath a blurry photo of Connor holding a wine glass on what looked like a hotel balcony. A friend had commented, "Wow, big spenders. Is that the 4 Winds?" To which Aunt Rachel proudly replied, "Yes, wedding and honeymoon, Illinois, courtesy of a very generous family friend." That made my eyebrow twitch. Connor getting married at 4 Winds. That was a luxury resort north of the city. Ocean View Suites. Michelin-starred catering. Not exactly. I'm 3 months behind on rent kind of money. So who was this generous family friend? I Googled the venue. Bookings were listed publicly for events. The weekend of the wedding was blocked for a private party under the name Glenage Holdings. And that's when the puzzle clicked. Glenage Holdings was owned by Richard Barlow, a real estate investor who also happened to be one of Dad's old golf buddies. I remembered him. Bald, loud, always boasting about being self-made, even though his first 4 properties were gifts from his father. Barlow had money influence and evidently a soft spot for Connor. I dug deeper. Turns out Connor had been interning at one of Barlow's smaller property firms. Unpaid, of course, but with all the Instagram posts, you'd think he was running the company. I even found a quote in a local business article where Barlow referred to him as a promising young leader. My jaw clenched. That was my phrase. I'd once used it to describe a junior dev during a podcast episode. Word for word, he was still stealing from me. But now he was wearing it as a costume, polished, rebranded, and preparing to walk down the aisle in a tailored suit paid for by a man who probably thought he was investing in the next tech entrepreneur. I stared at the screen, then I smiled. He was bluffing. Connor's entire empire was made of borrowed phrases, borrowed money, and borrowed time. All I had to do was pull the right thread. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked quietly. I didn't announce anything, didn't tell my friends, didn't post vague quotes on social media about revenge or karma. I simply got to work. First, I built a portfolio site for myself, clean, elegant, professional. Then I uploaded every major project I'd ever worked on, especially the ones Connor had borrowed on his resume. Each entry was time-stamped, backed up with Git logs, original client contracts, and screenshots. Next, I wrote a short blog post called How to Spot a Fake Founder. It wasn't aggressive, it wasn't bitter, it was helpful. Educational, the kind of post that quietly dismantles people like Connor without naming names. But the examples very specific, same tools, same phrases, same projects. Then I tagged it with SEO terms like Query Pulse B2B fraud, and yes, Glenage Holdings in turn. I didn't need it to go viral. I just needed one person from Barlow's network to read it, and I made sure that would happen. I emailed a copy of the post under a pseudonym to the Glenage Holdings press email with a polite message that said, "Thought you might want to vet your next rising star. Integrity is everything in real estate, isn't it?" No signature, no return address, just a digital whisper in the right ear. The wedding was held on a Saturday, hot, humid, and smug. I wore a charcoal gray suit, no tie, clean-shave hair, slick back with just enough gel to show I cared. I arrived 10 minutes early just as the string quartet started warming up. The venue was beautiful, I won't lie. Flower arches, ivory linens, gold-plated cutlery. Connor had gone all in, or rather, Barlow had. I walked in alone. No date, no entourage, just me and the version of myself they never bothered to see. Mom spotted me first. She was standing near the reception table clutching a clipboard like a stage manager. When her eyes landed on me, I saw it. That flicker. Surprise. Panic. A desperate mental scramble to figure out why I was there and what I might do. But she smiled. Too wide. "Derek," she said, walking over, "you made it. That means a lot." "Sure," I said calmly. "Wouldn't miss it." I watched her scan my outfit, my posture, my eyes. She was looking for a crack, for a tell, something to confirm her suspicion that I hadn't come in peace. But I gave her nothing. Just a serene smile and a sip of champagne. She gestured toward the seating chart. "You're at table 9 near the back." "But great view of the dance floor." Of course I was. I walked over. Table 9 was practically behind a pillar. My card had a typo. Derek. I smiled. They were still playing games, but not for long. The ceremony began. Guests settled. Connor walked down the aisle, beaming arm in arm with his bride, a woman I'd never met, wearing a $10,000 dress and a look of curated joy. The vows were flowery, rehearsed, full of vague promises about growth and honesty. I nearly choked on my champagne. Then came the reception, drinks, dancing, speeches. Dad gave a bland toast. Mom told a story about Connor's resilience. And then the microphone passed to Connor himself. He stepped up, tapped the mic, cleared his throat. I just want to say, he began that none of this would have been possible without the people who believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. Richard Barlow for taking a chance on me, my parents for supporting me through every twist and turn, and my beautiful wife for seeing the man I could become. He paused, then smiled in my direction. And even my brother Derek, who I may not always see eye to eye with, but who's always been an example of hard work and consistency. "We don't say it enough, but I admire you, man." A polite smattering of applause. And for a moment, it almost seemed sincere until I saw his smirk as he handed the mic back. That's when I knew he wasn't thanking me. He was using me, painting the narrative, publicly positioning himself as the grown-up, the one who'd made peace, the one who'd turned it all around. The guests clapped. Mom nodded misty-eyed, and Connor looked at me like he'd won. That's when the projector screen flickered on behind him. The room quieted, and there it was, a slideshow, photos of the couple, childhood memories, Connor's work, including a slide, oh yes, of one of my projects labeled as his. My pulse slowed. I stood up, walked calmly toward the AV table, and tapped the tech guy on the shoulder. "Switch to this," I said, handing him a USB per the groom's instructions. "Updated presentation." He hesitated, then nodded. I stepped back. The screen changed from a photo of Connor at a laptop to a screen capture of my website. QueryPulse.com, timestamps, screenshots, contracts, and at the bottom, a side-by-side comparison of Connor's LinkedIn profile and mine, every phrase he'd copied, every project he'd renamed. Silence fell, then gasps. The screen changed again, this time to the blog post. How to spot a fake founder. A beat, and then Richard Barlow stood up, walked over to Connor, and whispered something in his ear. Connor's face turned gray, then red, then a weird pale yellow, like someone who's just realized the floor beneath them was never solid. He turned toward me, jaw slack. I tilted my head, raised my glass, and toasted to truth, to peace, to walking away, not as a victim, but as a man who finally knew his own worth. The fallout wasn't loud. That's what surprised me most. It was quiet. No screaming, no public scene, no wine glasses flying through the air like in a soap opera. Just silence. After the final slide faded off the projector screen and the last murmurs died down, the wedding reception stumbled forward like a drunk trying to remember the steps of a dance. Someone turned off the screen. The music started again, tentative, confused. Waiters brought out dessert trays as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Connor disappeared. He left the mic on the floor and walked out through the side doors, jacket unbuttoned, one shoe, dragging like he was halfway out of his own skin. I watched him go, then sat back down at my table and ate the lemon tart they served me like it was the most natural thing in the world. Across the room, Mom stood frozen, her face stuck in an expression that was trying to decide between fury and shame. She didn't approach me, not right away. She just stood there, gripping her wine glass, her eyes darting to the door Connor had vanished through. Then to me, Aunt Rachel looked like someone had just yanked the emergency brake on her worldview. Mouth agape, fork mad air, Dad. He stayed seated at his table, didn't say a word, didn't even look at me. And that said everything. Eventually, Mom came over, her heels clacked against the marble floor like accusations. She didn't sit, just hovered above me like a thundercloud. You couldn't let him have one day, she said. No greeting. No. What was that? I met her eyes calm. Didn't he already have every day? Her mouth opened, closed. I kept going. He stole from me, lied about me, tried to break into my home. You ignored all of that, and now you're mad because I told the truth. You embarrassed him. She snapped, voice trembling. In front of everyone. He embarrassed himself, I said. I just held up the mirror. She stood there a moment longer, then without another word turned and walked away. That was the last time we spoke. The next week, my phone stayed quiet. No family calls, no late-night texts, no attempts at damage control. They'd closed ranks. I expected it. What I didn't expect was what came next. 3 days after the wedding, I got an email from Richard Barlow's assistant. Polite, short, Mr. Barlow would like to schedule a brief call to discuss a potential consulting opportunity. He was very impressed with your work. I blinked at the screen, reread it 3 times, then exhaled through a laugh, of course, because while Connor was licking his wounds, Richard had clearly done what any businessman does when his investments collapse. He looked for a better one. We set up the call. It lasted 15 minutes. He asked smart questions. I gave clear answers. He said he'd read my blog post, recognized the problem, and wanted to explore a partnership between Query Pulse and a portfolio of his companies. Nothing official yet, but a few introductions could go a long way. When we hung up, I just sat there at my desk for a moment, thinking about how far I'd come and how far I was going. Weeks turned into months. Connor resurfaced eventually, quietly, with a new job title at a smaller company. His LinkedIn went private for a while. The next time I checked, his bio had changed dramatically. No more fake projects, no more buzzwords, just a modest title. Customer Success Manager. No mentions of me. I knew he hated it, but I didn't gloat because I wasn't angry anymore. That was the true revenge. Not the slideshow, not the ruined wedding speech, but the fact that I had let go and he couldn't. He was still trying to climb ladders he hadn't earned. I was building my own tower. Mom never reached out. I got a Christmas card from Aunt Rachel that year. Just a generic happy holidays with no personal note. A photo of her dog in a Santa hat. I laughed when I saw it. Not bitter, just amused. Dad sent nothing. And Connor, he never apologized. But I didn't need one because by then I had something better. I had peace. Real peace. The kind you don't trade for proximity. The kind that comes from drawing lines and holding them even when it's lonely. Especially when it's lonely. And I had built a life that was mine fully. Finally, the last time I saw any of them was by accident. 8 months later, at a small tech conference downtown, I was giving a talk on integrity in software development. A short Q&A followed. When I stepped off stage, I saw them, Mom and Connor, standing near the exit. They didn't approach me, didn't smile, just watched like I was a movie they didn't understand anymore. I met their eyes, not at once, then turned and walked the other way. Not out of spite, not out of anger, but because I finally could. And as I stepped outside into the sun, my phone buzzed. An email from a VC firm in San Francisco. Subject line, interested in learning more about Query Pulse. I smiled, tucked the phone in my pocket, and kept walking. Not toward them, not away from them, just forward. On my own path, at my own pace, finally.